You know, one of the most valuable lessons I ever learned early on was called the language barrier, right? And I learned it from Walter Martin, and he talked about the difficulty that he faced when engaging with the cults, right, or people in false religions. And he said that the biggest difficulty was crossing the language barrier, which is that they will use the same terminology that he would use, but they had completely different definitions for that terminology, okay? What does this have to do with dispensationalism versus covenant theology? I'm not saying that either one of them are cults, okay? I just think that this conversation, this point here is applicable, which is that covenant guys and dispensational guys will use the same language, but they will have different definitions for those words, okay? And this is why there is so much confusion between these two worldviews, right? These two hermeneutics, these two methods of interpretation, because both of them will use the same language but mean different things when using that language. And there is perhaps no bigger confusion than how both of these viewpoints interpret the word Israel, okay? And that's the subject that I want to address in this video. Covenant guys and dispensational guys, right, define Israel and think of Israel completely differently almost. When a covenant guy hears the word Israel, primarily the first thing that comes into his mind is not ethnic Israel. Rather, it is God's chosen people. Okay? God's covenant people. So when he reads in the New Testament Israel, right? Sometimes, yes, they'll admit, sometimes it does refer to ethnic Israel, but primarily in his mind, he thinks God's covenant people. This is extremely important to understand, okay? Because the dispensational mind, the dispensational theologian, does not view it that way. When they read Israel, they think this means ethnic Israel, okay? What does this have to do with all the confusion? Well, because when the dispensational reads in covenant books or listens to covenant guys and they talk about how the church is Israel, in their mind, they believe that this means that covenant guys believe that the church has replaced ethnic Israel, okay? And this is why they call covenant theology replacement theology. Well, covenant guys really don't like that term, and they view it as a derogatory because they don't believe they've replaced Israel at all. They believe they're simply fulfilling God's covenants by becoming grafted into Israel, because Israel means God's covenant people. It doesn't mean necessarily ethnic Jews. So they don't view it as replacement theology. They view it as what they like to call fulfillment theology. Now see this right here. This defining terms makes these two worldviews so much clearer, okay? And because of this confusion, I think a lot of times you see both views throw accusations at each other because they don't understand what the other side is saying. And it makes things so blurry, right? And part of the whole reason I'm doing this series is because I want to not necessarily primarily argue for one side over the other, because if you don't know, I myself am dispensational, okay? I am a dispensational guy, right? And there's different nuance with that, and I'm going to make videos about that in the future explaining the differences, but I myself, like I said, am dispensational. But my primary goal is not to convince you that dispensationalism is the better theological viewpoint to have than covenant theology, but primarily I want to help bring about an understanding so that we can cut through the murkiness of the waters and really clarify what these two sides view, because a lot of times people have no idea what both sides actually believe because there's so much misinformation. Like if you listen to a dispensational guy talk about covenant theology, you're probably not going to get an accurate view of that theology, okay? And vice versa, if you listen to a covenant guy talk about dispensationalism, a lot of times it's skewered because neither side, I think, really, that's not a blanket sweep across the board true, but I think that a majority of guys don't understand what the other side truly believes, or is at least defining terms in the way they would want them defined. Okay? So again, this video is really simple, and all I'm trying to do is define one word, which is how covenant guys view the word Israel versus how dispensational guys view the word Israel. And I really wish I had been clearer in my first video, and that's the whole reason I'm making this video. But I think that this concept is key. It is crucial to understanding the differences, because as we go in, it is foundational. So when you are a covenant mind and you're reading the New Testament and you read Israel, the first thing that pops in your mind is not ethnic Israel, but it is God's covenant people. Okay? Versus the dispensational mind, when you read Israel, it means ethnic Israel, Jewish people, right? You were born a Jew. It is your biological, your ethnicity, you're Jewish. That's what Israel means, okay? And again, this is foundational difference, a foundational difference between these two worldviews. And as we go on, we're going to get more into this, and I'm going to talk about covenant theology, a video just about them, what they believe, what they hold to, what they don't hold to. And then the same thing with dispensationalism, what they believe, what they don't believe. And in these two views, you realize that, guys, these are two buckets that we like to put things in, but there's a lot of nuance that goes into it. So covenant guys, you can't just put them all into one bucket, right? Yes, they fit in that broad spectrum, but there is a spectrum, right? There's some nuance in there, some differences. Same thing with dispensationalists. You can't just throw them all into one category, right? We're doing that for simplicity's sake, but there is a spectrum. And I'm going to get into both of those, the differences between the two and the significance between the differences, because there is some significance, okay? But again, the language barrier, this is crucial, right? We need to build a better understanding between these two worldviews. And again, my goal is not to argue for one side over the other, but rather to foster understanding, because I think that will go so much further in understanding why these two views think the way they do, why these hermeneutics are different, why it is so crucial and foundational, and why they can look at the exact same Bible passage and come to a completely different understanding, not because they're twisting the scripture or because they're reading, necessarily reading into it what they want to see, but because their presupposition, right, their predetermined understanding, their hermeneutic affects how they interpret, right? Because a lot of times when we're talking about Bible passage, it is interpretation, okay? And depending on how you interpret something completely changes how you understand it. So again, this is another big picture video, and I'm not going to get too in depth, but I just want to get this idea across, which is define terms. And it would be really helpful probably for you to write down the differences. So when you encounter how someone defines a word, write down what they mean when they say that word. And that will go a long way in, not just in this worldview in general, but in your life, right, in general. So again, I hope this helped you guys out. I know it's another big picture video, and I'm going to make more in-depth ones coming up. So stick around for those. I think it'll be a great, valuable conversation to have. But again, we want to bridge an understanding between the two, because these are both Christian worldviews we're talking about, right? These are two different worldviews, but Christian, okay? And the believers, as long as we believe in the fundamentals, the main thing of the gospel, and right, we don't wiggle on those things, but when we're talking about these other things, these are secondary issues. So anyway, I hope this helped you guys out, and look forward to talking to you guys in the future, and God bless you guys. Bye-bye.